Hey guys, it's Dr. Bernardi here bringing you all things STEM. From my journey to yours, we are on an adventure together. Today, we have an incredible fortune and opportunity to speak with a seasoned product leader who I have had the personal pleasure of actually working with professionally. So let's welcome to the stage, Daryl. Hey, Daryl, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So, Daryl is a seasoned product leader dedicated to simplifying complex systems and creating seamless online to offline experiences. Her career across 3 countries is rooted in banking and spans sustainable energy and tech at Tesla and Twitter. She is now in healthcare after co founding a chat based health consultation service, which won a global award for its impact and creativity on healthcare accessibility. I did not know that, so that's really cool. With a multidisciplinary background, curiosity, and drive to improve lives, Daryl brings a unique blend of technical and social science skills with empathy to her work. She holds a master's in environmental and management from the National University of Singapore Yale program and honors degrees in psychology and marketing from De La Salle University in Manila. Prior to these, she was a 16-year-old aspiring doctor studying physical therapy at University of Santo Thomas, where she overcame her fear of dead bodies and separately realized a different path. We're going to touch on that. I love it. Beyond work, she makes time for life, traveling, and volunteering. Daryl also mentors aspiring women from developing countries like her, including the Department of State's Tech Women Initiative. So you are a force to be reckoned with. You are a power leader and a product leader. So tell me a little bit
Thanks for
about
setting the bar.
Daryl.
Yeah, as you read, I have been working in product for over 10 years, half of which has been at Tesla. Actually, with Solar City, then it was merged slash acquired by Tesla. And it was there where I really got deep into different areas of product operations, or what we call then sales operations, and also just like going from ground zero all the way to like launching a product and doing an exit, which I did for a community solar program. And then when I had to say goodbye to that product because all resources were going to the Model 3 at the time, we sold that off. And that's when I joined a separate division at Tesla in the motor side, was doing a lot of digital transformation, which was really fun part of the work. And after that, I was like, you know what, time at Tesla is done. I worked briefly with a sort of like a venture capital here in Silicon Valley, saying it sort of because their structure is not your traditional VC, but they did invest and support a lot of startups and worked with healthcare startup in Africa. They worked in different countries in Africa, and that was when I realized that, there's a lot of technologies outside the US that the US is very behind on, especially for this healthcare startup. They were focused on maternal healthcare, and they were using text messages in providing like prenatal to postnatal care for the mom, but also on checking up on the baby. And the thing I was working on with them was like their chatbot categorization to help the nurses triage, have their attention focused on based on the text messages that was coming in. So that was a cool part. Then the pandemic hit. That's when launched a startup to really help Filipinos. And same time joined Twitter because it is expensive living in Silicon Valley. So same time joined Twitter. I was in account health, worked with a lot of super smart machine learning engineers at my time at Twitter. Better opportunity came up while I was at Twitter in accessibility, where I was able to leverage more on my medical background. And it was like a larger scope. And so I took that on. And after that, I joined a healthcare startup. And now I am doing consulting and seeing where life takes me.
I think we're all seeing where life takes you. I did not know, so I've known you for quite a while now, but I didn't know about the sustainable energy piece. So what kind of was, you started in medicine, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but then you changed courses into sustainable energy. And so can you tell us a little bit about, your why?
Yeah. So I came from the Philippines, spent most of my life there, and being in a country where you see the environment is not the focus and it really degrades your health, you really see how it's like a feeding system into the healthcare system of like, like people are polluting or there's all these like different problems in the environment. And then like people get sick and go to the healthcare system and it's like a closed loop. Even if they get treatment, like it's not going to help as much because like if your air pollution is so bad or if XYZ is happening in your environment and now like it's globally like microplastics, pretty damned in that sense. And so that what got me into environment. I watched a video where it showed the like where stuff goes. I think that was the name back then. And to me that was like mind blowing, even though I would see like, trash sometimes not properly picked up by a garbage provider or whatever. You'd see it in like rivers and whatnot. And to me, it was like, oh, that's where all our stuff goes. It's just like it all goes into the landfill. Like, and as a teenager, I was like, like, Target got me more into environmental sustainability. I was a little too early getting into environmental sustainability. There weren't a lot of programs then as they are now. And when I left physical therapy, I was actually it's physical therapy program in the Philippines is different from here where you need like your pre-med. There you just like go straight in. And a lot of the classes are with the Faculty of Medicine. And so my thought when I went to take physical therapy was that, I wanted to be a doctor. Cool. And it was my dentist who told me it's a great program because you get to take all these classes that will make med school easier. But for me, it was more on, this is what med school is going to be like. And in physical therapy, we got to do labs or like patient labs with each other first. And I dropped before I actually went into like the clinical rotations. And to me, I was like, this is not for me. And I was like, I thought, like if I didn't want to be a doctor, I could be a physical therapist. But I'm like, yeah, this is totally not for me. And it was in physical therapy where I really realized that, I really like psychology, neuroanatomy, all that, like neurosciences. And coming from a country where there's not a lot of academic options compared to the US, where you could take multiple, like you could take two majors and a minor, or all these mixes that you can think of that didn't exist. So I was like, okay, which school can I transfer to in the Philippines without having to? Because I had an option to like, should I go like to the US and study here? And I was like, I already wasted like 3.5 years of my time, and like which school can I graduate from the fastest with a degree that I want? And I found like De La Salle University, which was one of the top 3 schools in the Philippines that had a 3-year baccalaureate program, and it allowed me to take a double degree. And I didn't know then, which I wish I knew, was that I could take an MBA with a physical therapy program. It was when I was handing over my documents to the assistant dean in De La Salle, where she was like, like you're so near graduation, why are you dropping now? And I was like, I don't want to be like physical therapy. I don't want to be a physical therapist. And like I'm not pursuing med school anymore. So like, yeah, I want to study here. And she was like, you do know you could just like take an MBA. I was like, wait, what? Like that was not the information I received or had. And so that's, I think, one thing I would have done differently. But anyway, I still proceeded because I already withdrew. It was too late. And so I still proceeded, took psychology, and I was like, psychology isn't as valued, at least in Asia, as a degree. You have to pursue further studies, and I knew I wanted to get into like the business side. So I was very limited in the choices of majors that I could couple psychology with, and then I chose marketing management because like marketing and a lot of business decisions do tie back to psychology. But having worked now for like over 12 years in total with and also plus grad school, psychology really helps a lot in terms of like presenting your data, in terms of like the deep statistical analysis that was like ingrained in psychology. That helps like my decisions. And even when I started working in banking, that was like my first job, is like doing risk analysis and also just like knowing taking like calculated risk and decision making. And to me, that a lot of that stems from psychology of like, okay, like what are not even, I'm not calculating p-values or anything, but it's more on, okay, like what is the risk, like, this is my hypothesis, like what are my variables that I can control, and like what is the risk coming in with this decision making. And so, yeah, that's like a long-winded background of how I got into it. And I left the Philippines. I left a stable job to take an internship here in the US that's more focused on the environment, because there weren't a lot of environmental jobs in the Philippines. And it was actually from that internship, I got a good recommendation letter to get into for my grad school application. And it was my manager at the time when I was doing an internship that recommended me to speak with someone who was his former intern also. And she was working at Solar City, and she was leaving, and she was the one who made a referral to me and pretty much paved the way into my career at Tesla.
That's awesome. So that's there's a lot there to unpack. So I first want to talk though about your decision. And I know in the bio you referenced you overcame your fear of dead bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece. But then, there's also this thing around once you're wedded to an option, that you have to stick with it and you can't
Mm-hmm.
evolve yourself. And I think, tying it back to my mission with Stem From is that it's not necessarily the route that you've taken, but it's the skills. And I think you touched on this really eloquently with respect to psychology. It's the skills, it's the training, it's the things, kind of the loose skills that you don't necessarily, or the soft skills that you don't necessarily have rigorous training around, which then you can take then to evolve your career and your path into something that you really do love.
Yeah. So first off, touching on the dead bodies piece, we had to dissect actual cadavers for human anatomy. And that was, I think, it was a long time ago, but it felt like a year of doing that. It was probably just one semester, maybe two. And I remember standing outside the lab, and like I've always avoided that section of the building because there's just a smell coming from it. And so I was standing outside. I was like, oh my God, this is the day I've been mentally preparing for. I have to go inside. And I remember one of my friends, she was like, hey, you need to go in now. Like, you can't just keep standing out here. And so I came in and I was like, oh, like it's more sadness. And I think looking back at it now as an adult, it is sad that there are people who, like their life circumstances led their bodies at the end of their life to be there. And I'm there to just like pretty much rip them apart and study it and take all emotions out of it. And that's one of the things I realized. If you want to be a doctor, sometimes you have to take emotions out, or a lot of times you have to take emotions out, which for patients, to them is like, I need empathy from my doctor, right? And like me dissecting a human cadaver taught me to like, you know what? Like, I just need to pass. Like, I need to pass the subject. I need to like, go through different bodies, like especially in exams, and like dissect it, whatnot. And so one is like, as you said, definitely overcame my fear of that. The smell still is stuck in my brain. um, and two is just like having that realization that also led me to my choice of, going outside. And like what you said of sometimes we do feel stuck in an option. And it's one of those like, sunk cost fallacies that we've already made this decision and investment. But then a lot of people don't think about the opportunity cost of staying in that decision, right? Or just sticking with whatever it is because you already spent time, money, resources, what have you with it. And to me, it was really building up that I knew like this is not the path I want to take. I definitely wanted to make a lot of money. I knew that from the get-go, even when I was in high school. But I like one of my dreams was like to own a mutual fund, which was back then not as accessible as it is now. So thank God for like democratizing investments, that a lot of people have access to it now. But back then, I was like, oh, I really wanted to have that, and so that I could retire early. And it just like the more I got into like the like studying healthcare and just like being exposed, there's an attached hospital to it that I would pass by every day to get to my dorm or to my like shared apartment. Is there's a lot of people here that can't afford healthcare, and in the Philippines, if you can't pay up front, you can't get healthcare in a lot of hospitals. And to me, that's like this clashes with my values, and that's one of the things that really drive me is my values of what do I value. If there's a dissonance there, like which one makes the most sense to me that I can live with. And so yeah, that's like one of the things that led me to leave it is like I don't want to get rich off of people's lives. Let's put it that way. Like that was my teenager brain. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that is appropriate. And you have to assess. It's interesting because I kind of circle back to this idea that you have to know yourself and your self-reflection and your own assessment as to where you think would be the most appropriate route for you. And it may evolve with time, and it has to also, whatever route you do choose has to then resonate with your own personal values. And I know like medicine for me, like my dad was a physician. I thought I was going to be a physician, and the idea of dealing with sick people every single day just was down. It upset me because I did not want to deal with that on a daily basis, and I think emotionally that would be really, really challenging for me. But there's other ways to though contribute to the health system without actually being a doctor.
Yeah.
Per se.
Yeah.
So
and
it's powerful.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things that like a lot of students should know, and even non-students, right? Is that like it's normal for us to have a lot of interests and take on those interests, right? And it's also normal for us to be like, some people have certain instances or situations where they pursue path because they need to for like financial or economic decisions for them or their family. And it's okay to veer away from that path when they realize that, hey, this is not for me, or actually sometimes actually when they discover that, oh, I could do other things. So I have a friend who is an RN, and she took her MBA, and then she started working for Johnson & Johnson, and now she's at another large healthcare, or like, I guess like medical firm, but more on like the supply side. And so there are different uses for it. And I know others who wanted to be doctors but went into like big pharma instead. So there's a lot of different paths where it can be applicable, or in my case, I never knew that I was going to be able to use it again, but now I'm in healthcare tech. So I think one of the things is like really to be open to the different opportunities out there and not be scared of leaving what you know is not for you.
So let's actually focus on, you talked a little bit about your introduction to Solar City, and then Solar City was then purchased by Tesla. And then you worked for Twitter. So you went from, relatively small-ish organization, it grew, and then you became part of, a juggernaut, for lack of a better word, or two juggernauts, frankly, in not only the social media, but also the sustainable energy film. So can you talk about that transition and what sort of values, missions were a part of that, and what did you experience on a day-to-day?
Yeah, so Solar City was already an E11 company, and so there was a lot in overlap in the culture, but since sustainable or solar in particular is more slow moving, because we work with governments and we know how governments work, and like utilities, it relies a lot on policy and utility acceptance in terms of what it is that you're proposing to be built. I was in the commercial side, so I worked on proposals. That's how I started. And it's more on really like getting buy-in and like moving from there. Whereas, when the merger/acquisition happened with Tesla, like the pace at Tesla is so much faster because it's a consumer good, but also like Tesla was fighting against like the big auto companies of like, making its mark. And when at the time that was happening too, like Model 3 hasn't launched yet, and it was going to be launched. And it was like, this is public information, that it was going to be a make or break time for Tesla. And if we didn't make it with the Model 3, it would have broken the company. So there's a lot, like you could have a separate multiple episodes on that, like what is learned in that type of business scenario. But definitely that's where I really picked up on like digital transformations and like just eliminating efficiencies. Luckily, I hate inefficiencies. Like my brain just like goes, if I'm in line and it's like taking too long, like I start looking at like what's going on in the back, like, oh, why aren't they doing this or that? Like, why is the process like this? That's why it's taking long. And so that helped me my work at Tesla, especially like in my last year there. And
it's funny that you talked about inefficiencies, because I think that's something that we commiserated on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, it's more like Tesla was really committed to it, and a lot of people, I was lucky to work with a lot of people that was committed to, it's corny, to the mission, but also to this like, okay, we need to make things better. And I had like the resources, even though at the time I felt like we lacked resources, but looking back, like there are resources there that helped us really push forward and like scale from like, just delivering Model S and X to like thousands of like hundreds of thousands of Model 3s globally. And yeah, it's like definitely the resources and the commitment of people like, yeah, we need to change. It's painful, but like we embrace change at Tesla. That's like one of the values of everyone that works there.
Well, I think that's seminal to the mission, right? Is you have to embrace change.
Yeah.
So I want to turn to the topic that it's from your perspective, right? So STEM from is, we've talked a little bit about our mission, but I'm also very passionate of talking through career routes and assessing where you want your career to be, and the environment by which you as an individual would thrive. And so you've been at Tesla, we just talked about Twitter, and then you've also been at startups. You and I were at a healthcare startup. And so when you think about the comparison of those environments, in the words of Daryl, how do you think about the pros and the cons to each of them?
There's a lot to unpack there. Which one do you want me to touch
Do the
on?
pros. We'll start positive.
In terms of I guess in terms of pros, I think it goes back to like with any career, any path, it's more on like, do I work for a small company or a large company, right? And a lot of fresh graduates face that, or even like in choosing internships, do I go for an internship at a small company or a large company? And definitely like Solar City, like that, it was a large company because we had a lot of construction crews and whatnot. But even like the size of Solar Cities, then merged with Tesla, which even became much larger. Twitter, it's small in terms of employees, but its impact or like, scope is huge. It's more on which one is a person more interested in. Um, Everyone will say, and I think there is truth to it, that if you have a big name on your resume, it can open a lot of doors. And I'm not going to be ignorant of that, Tesla hasn't helped my name in terms of like recruiters reaching out or in terms of just like people wanting to connect. It definitely has helped. So that's a huge pro. One thing to think of though is it doesn't mean it's a large organization. You can learn a lot. Sometimes you can be pigeonholed because I know people in large organizations that get pigeonholed. I was fortunate enough at Tesla that it operated somewhat like a startup in terms of the things you can do. It was easy, relatively easy, at least for me, there to move around to different teams and try different things. Since I was both in the energy and the motors division, and I got to know a lot of people across the company. And not all companies are like that. And I think it's really choosing what feels right for a person, because each person has different personalities, different work styles of like, am I going to thrive in a large environment or am I going to thrive in a smaller environment? At a startup, it can be chaotic. Everyone knows that. Like it's like a commonality across startups. But one of the things that someone has to look at in a startup is like leadership. It's one of the things I learned when I was in banking and like doing analysis on industries and companies. Like, oh, who are they led by? Especially if it's a smaller company trying to get investments or loans, who are they led by? And like, how are they as a leader? And I think if you're in a startup, it's one of the things to look for is, are these people that I will be working with, whether it's my manager or whether it's, even if you don't directly work with them, like the CEO, C-suite, senior VPs, whatever, are these people you think you can learn from? Will you have the ability, especially at an early stage of a career, will you have the ability to pick up skills that you want at that place? And I think that goes for like a lot of career path is like when if you're fortunate enough to make a choice of, picking jobs or like a career path, or even like, offer letters of like, what is it that you want to get the most out of it? Like long term, will this serve me? And that's one of the things that I use when I pick paths. And it's more, I'll say like for the startup where we work together, for me, it's more on, oh, let me see if I do want to work in US healthcare. Is this like, a place or problem space that I do want to be in? So I chose to be at a startup instead of going for and trying my hand in like larger healthcare technology companies, or even like any company in like the healthcare industry complex in the US that's larger. And so, yeah, I think it's on just like picking what is right for you. And there's pros and cons to that depending on the personality of the person.
No, that's precisely right. That is exactly right. And I think that your methodology of how you assessed your position is spot on for you and is really helpful for others, because I think there is, there's this allure, and I mean, the same thing can be said with universities. You want to go to one of the Ivies or not,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, yeah, it has the name, it has the cachet, but is it the right place for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the it's totally appropriate. And yes, it has, I think kids coming out of school, and I say kids, I think they're, adults, but they're coming out of undergraduate thinking, oh, I'm going to go and get a job at Google. And it's like, well, is that really what you want to do? And is that going to give you and offer you the opportunities that you want out of life and in a career? And it might be, and it might not be. I had another guest on who works for Intel, and she was talking about how Intel supports working in other divisions, and that you can go take over a 6-week sabbatical for someone who is going on a long-term PTO, and you can go and be in marketing and see how you like it. And if you don't like it, you come back to your old job.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that Intel supports amongst its career folks. And that's great. Other large companies don't do that,
Yeah.
and that's not something, that opportunity is not necessarily something that would be afforded at a startup, as an example, even though you do get to wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are companies that also support / reimburse your your grad school expenses. So there's that piece to think of. But also it's being realistic of it's okay to aim for the Googles and whatnot, but it's not a straight path. Like not everyone that enters there came from there as a entry level. We all have different paths with these larger companies, and it's really what is the skill set that you're bringing to the table when you start applying for these. And I like how you said with the undergraduates, looking at different programs or schools or Ivy Leagues, but taking my international perspective back bringing my international perspective on the table is sometimes there are opportunities outside the U.S. too that could be beneficial. So say if someone wants to be a lawyer in the U.S., you have to do pre-law, same for med school. And if you follow the British system, if you go to the UK or other countries, even like Singapore, where I studied, your undergrad is already law. And for those that want to break back into the US, they just take their master's here and take the bar exam. So saves a lot of money. Same for healthcare fields. I lived in the Philippines, I mentioned, and I think it was in the 1920s when the US built the first nursing school to be a pipeline for the Philippines, because a lot of Americans didn't want to be nurses. And so from nursing, physical therapy, a lot of these allied healthcare fields to medicine, we would see foreigners take classes there because they know it's going to be accredited. So it's because it is expensive to study here. So there are those options out there. And I know a lot of people are oh, I want to be a doctor, but it's too expensive. It's no, you could try your hand. There's surprisingly a lot of financial support out there, but also there are countries that feed the US healthcare system that is cheaper, much cheaper than studying here in the US. And that's one of the reasons why I did my master's in Singapore. The government had a program where if you sign a bond with them to work there for 3 years, they will subsidize your tuition by, I think at my time it's 50%.
It's brilliant.
Top of other sponsorships or financial stuff that you could apply for. Yeah.
So this has been a fabulous conversation. We're nearing the end of our time. I want to, though, piggyback off of that. Well, we've spent the last couple of minutes. And if you were to, go back in time 10, 15 years ago to young Daryl, younger Daryl, you're still young.
I'm not, I wish I was.
What words of wisdom would you have imparted on her?
Go with your gut more. I think that would be it. And like filter out the noise more. And I think that's something that is also learned over time. I don't think I would have changed anything, especially like changing schools, because I met a lot of like my lifelong friends at De La Salle University. But in terms of like practicality, yeah, like it would have been more practical for me to finish physical therapy, then get an MBA. But I think like, going back to like what would I have done differently, which I think a lot of younger people can now do, is get outside information. When I already knew I was trying to shift out, a lot of my resources available were in the healthcare field. So I didn't get as much information. And since I was always studying in the books, like my high school friends back then, I didn't get to be in touch with them too as much as I probably should have. And that probably would have offered me a different perspective, or at least their parents would have. But yeah, it's different. And like for my parents, they are both engineers. And so to them, I was privileged enough that they didn't impose as much of like what they want me to be, but more on like follow what you want to do. And yeah, like I think I would stick with like follow with what I wanted to do, but listen more to my gut and get outside information.
True words. True words. Stick with your gut. That's always
Always good.
that is always good. If something
Yeah.
does not sit well with your gut, you know it's not
Yeah.
right.
But like what we say in product, and actually a lot, is like if your spidey senses are built over time through experience. That's why.
Oh yes, this doesn't seem right. Excuse me. What?
It's
I
because
love
of
it.
previous experience. Yeah.
Yep. Amen to that. And with that, thank you so much for your time, Daryl. This has been such a pleasure. You have just a wealth of knowledge and experiences that you shared with us today. And I personally am so grateful for you spending the time. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I hope
Of course. Of
I
course.
shed like some new perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you do. You have fabulous perspective. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye. At STEM From, we are working towards making all STEM careers achievable regardless of your identity, background, or even access to resources. Here at STEM From, we will introduce you to all things STEM, whether they be careers, research, tips and tricks, and even inspiration. Thanks all for watching and learning with us today. And don't forget to ask yourselves, where do you want your journey to stem from? Bye, guys.